All right, so today we're diving deep into a question with huge consequences for patients who've suffered a ruptured brain aneurysm. When are blood transfusions really necessary? You sent over this fascinating study from the New England Journal of Medicine, and, well, we're going to unpack it all right here.
Yeah, it's all about anemia, right? It's actually pretty common after a brain aneurysm bursts. And get this, it can worsen brain damage, but for the longest time, doctors weren't sure if transfusions actually helped patients recover better long term. So this study really tackles that uncertainty head on.
So this SAHARA trial, I mean, it kind of threw a wrench into conventional thinking, didn't it?
Yeah.
Over 740 patients, two approaches to transfusions. We're talking liberal, where they're given out a bit more freely, and then restrictive, where they're more cautious.
Mm-hmm.
It's the kind of research that could really change how doctors treat these patients. So let's break down exactly what they did.
Okay, so to get some really reliable results, right? The researchers were very careful with the study design. Like they randomly assigned patients to either the liberal or restrictive group.
Like flipping a coin, right?
Exactly, just like flipping a coin to keep things fair. And that way, any differences we see in how the patients recovered, well, it's likely due to the transfusion strategy and not some other thing they had going on.
So they created two even playing fields right off the bat.
Yeah,
I also noticed they used a blinded approach. I mean, that just makes the whole thing even more rigorous, doesn't it?
absolutely. That means that whoever was evaluating the patient's recovery, they had no clue which transfusion strategy each patient actually received. It's kind of like judging a cooking contest. You can only taste the food, you don't see who cooked it.
You're just judging on the merits.
Yeah, it just takes away any potential bias. So
Yeah.
you're really focusing on the outcomes.
And to top it all off, they even had an independent group of experts to analyze the data, like having a whole panel of judges, keeping score. So it sounds like they really dotted their I's and crossed all their T's.
Oh, yeah.
But before we jump to the results, let's talk about the patients themselves. Were
Yeah.
these two groups comparable at the very beginning?
Oh, that's such a good question. And luckily, the answer is yes. They were. Like, both groups were super similar. The average age was around 60 and mostly women in both groups. Plus, they had similar medical histories. And importantly, even the severity of their brain aneurysm ruptures was comparable between the groups.
Wow. So we are truly comparing apples to apples here. That's
Exactly.
great news for the reliability of everything. Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, like what do these transfusion strategies actually look like in practice?
So, okay, picture hemoglobin as like the fuel gauge in your brain, right? Now, the liberal strategy, they'd give a transfusion anytime the patient's hemoglobin level that measures how much oxygen their blood can carry dipped below 10 GDL. So basically, they were topping off the fuel tank whenever it got a little low.
A proactive approach.
Yeah, keeping those hemoglobin levels nice and steady.
Interesting. Interesting. What about the restrictive strategy?
Okay, so with this one, they only gave a transfusion if the hemoglobin level dropped below 8 GDL. Way
Yeah.
lower, right? So it's like they were letting the fuel gauge get closer to empty before they refilled it.
Okay, so two different approaches, but did giving blood more freely actually lead to better outcomes in the end? I mean, that's the question we're all wondering.
Well, here's where things get interesting. The study found that there was no significant difference in long-term recovery between the two groups. So after a whole year, both the liberal and the restrictive groups, they showed similar levels of independence and how well they could do their daily activities.
Wow, that is surprising. I mean, you'd think more blood equals more oxygen equals a smoother recovery.
Yeah.
So how did they even measure that recovery anyway?
They used something called the modified Rankin scale. It's been around for a while, a good way to assess a person's independence after a stroke or brain injury. Basically, it ranges from 0, meaning totally recovered, to 6, which unfortunately means death. And after a year, both groups scored similarly on that scale.
So really, the long-term outcomes were similar despite those different approaches to transfusions. What other interesting things popped up in the data?
Well, not surprisingly, the liberal group got more transfusions. I mean, almost everyone in that group got at least one compared to only about a third in the restrictive group. But here's the catch. There was no difference in bad side effects between the two.
Really? That's
Yeah.
wild. I always thought more transfusions meant a higher risk of complications. What kind of side effects are we talking about here?
Oh, things like allergic reactions, fever, even lung problems. They looked at all of that, and the rates were basically the same between the groups. So that traditional worry that more transfusions equals more complications, well, it just didn't hold up in the study.
So we've got this unexpected finding. Giving blood more freely, it didn't lead to better recoveries, and it didn't seem to do any harm. So what's the takeaway for doctors who are treating patients with these ruptured brain aneurysms and anemia? What do they do with this information?
I think it really pushes us to rethink that more is always better idea when it comes to transfusions, you know. It suggests that we need to be more careful, really look at each patient individually.
So like a more tailored approach instead of this one-size-fits-all idea.
Yes, exactly. We need to move away from just looking at numbers on a chart, like just hemoglobin levels, and consider the whole patient. You know, what other medical problems do they have? What are their preferences when it comes to medical procedures? All these things should be part of the decision-making process.
It sounds like a call for a more personalized approach, for sure. This study is definitely making waves in the medical community. Doctors are really reassessing how they handle these transfusions. But like any research, we got to consider the limitations. No study is perfect. What caveats should we keep in mind as we try to understand these results?
Well, one important thing is that even though the people evaluating the patients were blinded to the transfusion strategy, the doctors treating them were not. So there's always a chance that their knowledge of which group a patient was in could have subtly affected how they treated them. It's a tough bias to totally get rid of in studies like this.
I can see that. It's like even subconsciously knowing that the patient's getting more transfusions might make the doctor a little more cautious.
Right, exactly. It's subtle, but we have to acknowledge it. And then, of course, like you said earlier, measuring something like delayed cerebral ischemia, a complication that can happen after a brain aneurysm, it's not always so straightforward.
Yeah, you're talking about narrowing of those blood vessels in the brain.
Yeah, yeah.
It requires a lot of interpretation of medical imaging and clinical science. So there's always some level of, yeah, subjectivity involved, even with standard definitions.
So even though we can gain some valuable insights from the study, we can't take it as the absolute truth. There's nuance, interpretation, all that.
Definitely. And that's exactly why these critical appraisals are so important. They guide us to a balanced and informed interpretation of all the research, help us see where the study is really strong and where we need to be a little more cautious.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, the appraisal also digs into this concept of external validity, right?
Yeah.
Which basically asks, can we take these findings and apply them to other populations, other settings? What are your thoughts on that? Oh, that's a crucial question whenever we're evaluating research, especially when we're thinking about applying it to real-world clinical practice. One thing the appraisal brings up is that the SAHARA trial, it was done in higher income countries, places with more, available healthcare systems and resources. So it makes you wonder if the results would be the same in lower income settings where resources might be scarce and medical practices might be different.
So the findings are great, but we can't just assume that what works in one place will automatically work in another.
Yeah, it's a valid point. I mean, think about it. There could be unique factors in different populations, like genetic predispositions or variations in how they do things medically, that could affect how people respond to transfusions. We need more research to see if these findings hold true in different contexts.
It seems like we've only just scratched the surface here when it comes to understanding the best way to use blood transfusions for these brain aneurysm patients. What would you say are the biggest unanswered questions that future research needs to tackle?
Well, one of the most important questions is, are there specific types of patients who actually benefit more from one transfusion strategy versus the other? We touched on this a little earlier, but it's so important to remember, could younger patients who tend to bounce back better do even better with a more liberal approach? Or could older patients be more vulnerable to complications from multiple transfusions, so maybe the restrictive strategy is better for them? There's so much to learn.
Age definitely seems like a key factor to consider.
Yeah.
Are there other patient characteristics that we should investigate further?
Oh, absolutely. The severity of the aneurysm, where exactly it is in the brain, other medical conditions like heart disease or diabetes, all of these things could affect how a patient responds to transfusions. And we really need to dig deeper into those long-term effects of transfusions, both the good and the bad, the stuff that might happen years down the line.
It's not just about the immediate aftermath. It's about the potential ripple effects later on.
Exactly. We have to think about the entire journey, not just a single moment in time. And, as we said before, coming up with better ways to measure those outcomes is crucial, right? We need tools that truly capture what recovery means to patients, not just focusing on their physical independence, but also things like thinking skills, emotional well-being, and their overall quality of life.
It's like moving away from this one-size-fits-all model in medicine and going towards something more personal and holistic, which is really cool to see.
It is really cool. We're moving into this era where treatment decisions are more tailored to each individual patient. We're thinking about all sorts of factors, not just the immediate medical problem.
Right.
This change requires constant research, questioning those old assumptions and making sure patients have a voice in the decisions about their own care. And the SAHARA trial, along with that critical appraisal, is a fantastic example of how this whole landscape is changing.
It's definitely a turning point in how we think about transfusions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And like the appraisal says, this is relevant for doctors and patients.
Oh, yeah, totally. Patients should feel comfortable talking openly and honestly with their doctors about the potential benefits and risks of these blood transfusions. Consider their individual situation, what they prefer, what's important to them.
It's about shared decision-making. Doctors and patients working together to figure out the best plan.
Exactly. That's the ideal, right? Informed and collaborative decisions are what lead to the best patient care. And studies like this one with the critical appraisals, they give us the knowledge and the evidence we need to have those important conversations.
I love that. Well, we've covered a lot today. We've really gotten into the details of the SAHARA trial. We looked at the insights from that critical appraisal, and we even talked about what it all means for patient care in the bigger picture. So for our listener who's clearly really interested in all this, what would you say are the most important things to take away?
I think the biggest takeaway is that while blood transfusions are common and often very necessary, they do come with risks, and they don't always mean a better outcome. This study really challenges that idea that more is always better.
Yeah, it's a great reminder that every single medical decision should be carefully weighed. What are the potential benefits? What are the potential risks? And what are the individual patient's needs, preferences, all of that?
Exactly. And this study, along with the critical appraisal, really gives both doctors and patients the tools they need to make those decisions in a way that's informed, thoughtful, and collaborative.
So it's about moving away from just looking at numbers and towards a more holistic view, considering the patient's well-being, long-term goals, and their values.
That's a great way to put it. We need to treat the whole person, not just a set of data points.
And this research helps doctors do just that. They can make more personalized and evidence-based decisions working together with their patients.
Exactly. And patients can advocate for themselves, ask questions, and be a part of their own care plan.
It's all about sharing knowledge, open communication, and making decisions together.
That's the essence of good medicine.
Perfectly said. Well, we've definitely given our listener a lot to think about. But now for that final thought-provoking question to leave them with. The study found that more liberal transfusions, they didn't always lead to better outcomes. But what other factors should doctors be thinking about when deciding whether or not to transfuse a patient with a ruptured brain aneurysm? What matters most to you, the patient?
That's such a great question. It really does make you think, doesn't it? I mean, it goes beyond just the medical stuff. We have to understand what the patient values, what they want, what's truly important to them as they recover.
Yeah, it's about having those honest, open conversations between the patient and the doctor, weighing those potential benefits and risks together, coming to a decision that feels right for that individual.
Exactly. And that decision might be different for everyone. Some patients might want to keep medical interventions to a minimum, even if it means a slightly higher chance of certain complications. Others might feel okay with a more aggressive approach, even if there's a bigger chance of side effects.
Right. It's about respecting those individual choices and recognizing that there's no one-size-fits-all answer when it comes to medical care. It's a true partnership.
Absolutely. And this study, by pushing these important conversations and questioning those long-held beliefs, really moves us toward that more patient-centered model of care.
Well said. I think we've done a good job explaining the complexities of this study and all the implications.
Yeah.
Hopefully our listener has a better grasp of the research now and all the interesting questions it raises.
It definitely shows how just one study can completely change how we approach medical care. It really underlines how important that critical appraisal is, helping us navigate this constantly changing world of medical research.
For sure. Remember, medicine is always evolving. New discoveries are being made all the time. Stay curious, stay informed, and never be afraid to ask questions.
And remember, your voice matters. Your preferences matter. Be involved in your own healthcare journey.
Until next time, keep diving deep.
It really gets you thinking, right? Like some people, they might want to get back to their everyday life as quickly as possible, even if it means, maybe a slightly higher risk down the line. While others, they might be more focused on minimizing those long-term risks, even if the recovery takes a little longer.
And that's where those honest conversations with their doctor are so important. Patients should feel like they can really speak up, Voice their concerns, ask any questions, and tell the doctor what truly matters to them.
Yeah, totally. It's like they have this roadmap together. The doctor has the knowledge, the guidance, and the patient, they help steer the course based on their own values and what they want.
It's a true partnership.
It is. It really is. And that shared decision making, that's the heart of what makes good patient care.
Well said. I think we've really explored this study in depth, and I hope our listener now has a much clearer understanding of this research, and maybe it sparks some new questions for them too.
It definitely highlights how powerful a single study can be. Like, it can change how we think about medical care entirely. And it also shows just how important that critical appraisal is to help us make sense of all the research out there, especially as things are constantly changing.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone, medicine is always moving forward, new discoveries all the time. So stay curious, stay informed, and never hesitate to ask questions.
And don't forget, your voice matters, your preferences matter. Be an active part of your own health journey.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep diving deep, everyone.